Ancient stories often begin with kings, with cities rising beside rivers, or with heroes whose names were carved into stone. Their statues stood beneath the sun. Their victories were written carefully onto tablets, and their histories were meant to be remembered. But some figures arrived differently. Some entered history softly, appearing not at the center of the story, but at its edges, half hidden among whispers and shadows. Long ago, when much of the world slept beneath unfamiliar stars, people looked into the darkness and imagined unseen things moving there. Night felt larger then. The spaces beyond torchlight stretched farther, and distant winds crossing deserts carried sounds that could not always be explained. Strange dreams arrived. Small fears grew larger. Tiny mysteries lingered. And somewhere among those old stories, among ruined cities and forgotten beliefs, a name began to drift through history. Lilith. A quiet name, a mysterious one. Over thousands of years, she would become many things to many people. Some believed she was a spirit of the wilderness, wandering far from human settlements beneath moonlit skies. Others imagined a dangerous being of the night, spoken about in hushed voices and old warnings. Later storytellers transformed her again, reshaping her into a figure of rebellion, mystery, sorrow, and power. And that is part of what makes her story so unusual. Because unlike many figures from mythology, Lilith never seems to remain still for very long. She shifts, she changes, she appears in fragments. Like wind moving through ancient ruins, she slips between cultures and centuries, gathering new meanings wherever she goes. Questions follow her. Was she once part of older forgotten beliefs, buried beneath desert sands and broken temples? Was she a warning from the ancient world, a symbol, a shadow, a misunderstood figure rewritten over generations? Or was she something stranger still? No one seems entirely certain. Small mysteries endure. Hello, dear dreamers, and welcome back to the Sleepy Legends channel, the place where myths, legends, history, and forgotten stories gently wander through the night. Tonight we journey into one of mythology's most mysterious and ever-changing figures, a name that has traveled from ancient tablets and old folklore into paintings, literature, modern stories, and conversations that continue even today. Together we will explore 100 sleepy facts about Lilith, tracing her path through the ancient world and following the many stories that grew around her. We will wander through old cities, forgotten traditions, moonlit landscapes, and strange beliefs carried forward by generations of storytellers. And as we travel, we may discover something curious. Sometimes the figures that survive the longest are not the ones history explains clearly. Sometimes they are the mysteries left partially unsolved, the stories people return to again and again, each generation finding something different waiting there. So tonight we travel toward old deserts, distant winds, and forgotten whispers, searching for a figure who has never entirely stepped out of the shadows. And our journey begins long before Lilith herself appears, in the ancient world where her story may first have taken shape. Long before Lilith appeared in stories of mystery and moonlight, before later generations gave her new meanings and new identities, there was an older world waiting in the distance. A world of river valleys and rising cities, of flickering lamps and endless skies, where some of humanity's earliest civilizations built their lives from mud, stone, and imagination. Our journey begins there. Thousands of years ago, between the winding paths of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, great cities rose slowly from the earth. Places like Uruk, Babylon, and many others emerged across broad landscapes where merchants, travelers, farmers, and storytellers moved beneath enormous skies. Life gathered around water because in much of the ancient world, rivers meant survival. Crops depended upon them. Communities depended upon them. Entire kingdoms depended upon them. This region would eventually become known as Mesopotamia, a name that comes from ancient Greek and means land between rivers. Historians often call it one of the cradles of civilization because some of humanity's earliest large cities and organized societies developed there. But for ancient people, this was not simply geography. It was home. The rivers brought life, and they also brought uncertainty. Floods could arrive unexpectedly. Droughts could stretch across seasons. Crops might flourish one year and struggle the next. Storms gathered over distant horizons, sometimes bringing relief and sometimes bringing disaster. Life could change quickly. Ancient people lived close to uncertainty in ways that can feel difficult to imagine today. Small changes mattered. Strange weather mattered. Unusual dreams mattered. A poor harvest mattered. And when uncertainty remains part of everyday life, people often begin searching for explanations. Many ancient civilizations explain mysterious events through stories involving gods, spirits, supernatural forces, and unseen beings. To modern ears, that may sound distant, even unfamiliar. Yet imagine living in a world without weather forecasts, modern medicine, electricity, or scientific instruments. Imagine hearing distant winds at night and not knowing exactly where they came from. Imagine illness arriving suddenly, without explanation. Imagine watching storms form over empty horizons. Imagine looking upward and seeing thousands of stars spread across dark skies, while believing the heavens themselves carried messages. The world would feel different, very alive, very mysterious. Ancient people often viewed the visible and invisible worlds as deeply connected. Mountains could possess sacred meaning. Rivers might carry spiritual significance. Winds could seem alive. Dreams sometimes felt important enough to influence decisions. Dreams especially occupied a curious place in ancient life. Across many civilizations, dreams were not always dismissed as random nighttime experiences. They sometimes carried warnings. Sometimes they offered guidance. Sometimes they hinted at events not yet understood. And because dreams felt real, because emotions lingered long after waking, and because strange experiences often remained difficult to explain, unseen worlds became woven into everyday life. People did not simply fear monsters. They lived beside mysteries. As evening approached ancient cities, life changed rhythm. Markets slowly quieted. Families gathered indoors. Lamps filled with oil flickered gently against walls of clay and stone. Shadows stretched across narrow streets and alleyways. Night transformed familiar places. Modern cities rarely become truly dark. Streetlights shine across roads. Windows glow. Traffic moves continuously. Light gathers almost everywhere. But thousands of years ago, darkness arrived differently. Darkness felt larger. Beyond torchlight and firelight, landscapes disappeared almost completely. Distances became uncertain. Familiar paths looked unfamiliar. Small sounds carried farther. Footsteps, wind, a door closing somewhere in the distance, a dog barking beyond the city walls. Small sounds mattered. Many supernatural traditions throughout history became connected with nighttime because darkness naturally creates uncertainty. Human beings are remarkably skilled at imagining possibilities when information is incomplete. A shadow becomes movement. A distant shape becomes a figure. Wind passing through an opening begins to sound like whispers. Even today, people occasionally experience that strange moment when an ordinary sound feels briefly mysterious. Ancient people understood those feelings too. Perhaps they simply explained them differently. Stories began filling those uncertain spaces. Stories of spirits, stories of strange beings, stories of invisible presences moving beyond ordinary sight. Folklore often develops in places where fear and mystery overlap. Throughout history, communities created stories to explain experiences that felt difficult to understand. Strange sounds, unusual illnesses, bad dreams, unexpected events. Stories offered structure, stories offered meaning, and stories traveled. Not every unseen thing was viewed as dangerous, of course. Many ancient cultures believed in protective spirits, household guardians, divine messengers, and helpful beings who watched over homes and communities. But uncertainty has always left room for darker possibilities too. Nearly every civilization developed stories involving both protective and dangerous supernatural beings. Human beings seem naturally drawn toward creating order within mystery. We look for patterns. We search for causes. And perhaps most importantly, we seek comfort. That comfort often arrived through rituals and symbols. Across thousands of years and many different cultures, people created protective objects meant to provide reassurance and safety. Some carried carved stones. Others wore symbols. Families placed objects near doorways or sleeping spaces. Parents especially watched carefully over children, because childhood carried enormous uncertainty in the ancient world. Illnesses that modern medicine now understands sometimes appeared suddenly and without explanation. Families loved and protected their children deeply, yet many dangers remain mysterious and frightening. Protective amulets have existed across cultures for thousands of years, serving as small reminders that people have always searched for ways to feel safe in uncertain worlds. A charm above a doorway, words spoken before sleep, symbols carried during travel, small acts of reassurance, small acts of hope. And perhaps this tells us something important about the ancient world. People living thousands of years ago were not so different from people today. They worried about family. They worried about health. They wondered about strange experiences. They tried to understand events that felt confusing or frightening. They looked for answers. Sometimes those answers arrived through observation, sometimes through religion, sometimes through stories. And somewhere beyond the city walls and beyond the familiar glow of lamps, old stories had already begun taking shape. Stories connected to wilderness and darkness. Stories connected to wind and unseen movement. Stories involving strange beings said to travel through lonely places after nightfall. Names had already begun to emerge. Quiet names, ancient names, names attached to mysteries that drifted through generations. Small beginnings often look unimportant at first. Many legendary figures do not enter history dramatically. They do not arrive with crowns or armies or monuments. Instead, they begin at the edges. A whisper becomes a story becomes a belief travels through centuries. And as we continue our journey deeper into the ancient world, leaving behind city walls and moving toward darker horizons, we will begin to encounter strange spirits and forgotten figures carried through Mesopotamian traditions, names that may eventually lead us one step closer toward the shadowy beginnings of Lilith herself. As our journey continues, the city lights behind us grow smaller. The last oil lamps fade into the distance, and beyond the walls of familiar places, the ancient world begins to feel quieter, wider, and more uncertain. Winds move across open landscapes. Moonlight stretches over empty ground. Somewhere far away, sand shifts against stone. And perhaps this is where the story begins to change. Because long before people spoke of Lilith directly, strange names had already begun appearing in the ancient world, names attached to beings that seemed to belong to the night itself. Small names, ancient names, names that drifted through stories long before they reached us. Among Mesopotamian traditions, historians have discovered references to mysterious figures known as Lilu, Lilitu, and Ardent Lily. These names appear in texts and traditions that stretch back thousands of years, though exactly what they represented remains difficult to determine. Ancient stories rarely arrive neatly preserved. Time scatters details, tablets break, meanings change. The further back we travel, the less certain the road becomes. And perhaps that uncertainty feels strangely fitting, because Lilith never fully arrives with a clear introduction. She approaches gradually, like a figure seen across moonlit ground, becoming visible only in fragments. Some of these ancient beings appear associated with wind, others seem connected with the night. Some traditions describe figures moving through lonely places beyond cities and settlements. Already certain themes begin appearing: darkness, distance, wilderness, movement after sunset, small pieces gathering slowly. Now imagine an evening long ago in ancient Mesopotamia. A family sits together inside a home of clay and stone. The day's work has ended. Outside, darkness settles over streets and rooftops. Oil lamps cast gentle shadows along the walls. Someone begins telling a story. Not a story of kings, not a story of war. Something quieter, something unsettling. Perhaps they speak of strange winds moving across empty places after dark. Perhaps they tell of unseen figures wandering beyond city walls. Perhaps children listening closely pull blankets a little tighter. Stories like these traveled easily. They moved from parent to child, from traveler to traveler, from city to city. Long before books became common, stories survived through memory. Across generations, details shifted. One storyteller added something, another removed something. Over centuries, beliefs changed shape. stories wandered, and wandering stories often become mysterious stories. The beings associated with names like Lilith remain difficult to define precisely because ancient traditions rarely functioned like modern encyclopedias. There was no single official version, no complete explanation waiting patiently on a shelf. Instead, stories overlapped, ideas merged, beliefs evolved. For modern historians, reconstructing ancient mythology can sometimes resemble listening through walls, hearing only fragments of conversations and trying to understand what once existed on the other side. Questions remain, many questions. Some scholars have suggested that these early figures may have become distant roots for later Lilith traditions. Others remain cautious. The evidence is incomplete. The connections are debated, and that uncertainty follows us again. Because Lilith's story does not move in straight lines. It bends, it changes, it gathers meanings. Still, certain patterns continue appearing across these old traditions. Night remains important. Isolation remains important. Strange movement through darkness remains important. And dreams begin appearing too. Dreams occupied a fascinating place in the ancient world because sleep itself often felt mysterious. Imagine closing your eyes in a world without modern explanations for consciousness, then finding yourself suddenly walking through strange places, encountering unfamiliar people and impossible events. Night after night, year after year. Sleep must have seemed like crossing a threshold, a doorway between worlds. Not every dream felt comforting. Nightmares, especially, could linger long after morning arrived. Strange sensations during sleep, frightening visions, sudden waking. All of these experiences demanded explanation. People search for causes, invisible causes, and sometimes those causes became stories. Perhaps this is one reason figures associated with night and unseen movement gained such power in human imagination. They offered explanations for experiences that felt confusing and deeply personal. A strange dream, a shadow glimpsed briefly, a feeling difficult to describe. Human beings have always searched for meaning inside mystery. And somewhere along that long journey, among stories of nighttime beings and ancient winds, among fragments carried through centuries and cultures, a familiar shape slowly begins forming. Not fully visible yet, not entirely understood, but closer now, much closer. Because in the next stage of our journey, a figure standing quietly at the edge of ancient traditions will begin stepping further into view. And for the first time, the name Lilith herself will begin emerging from the shadows. As our journey carries us onward, the shadows are becoming more defined. Because for a long while, Lilith existed more as possibility than certainty. She lived in fragments and scattered traditions, in names that sounded similar and stories that may or may not have shared common roots. The farther back we looked, the less distinct the picture became. But eventually, a name begins appearing more clearly: Lilith. Not hidden inside clusters of similar words, not buried quite so deeply beneath ancient uncertainty. Just a name, briefly, quietly, and yet even here, certainty remains elusive. One of the earliest possible references often connected with Lilith appears in the Hebrew Bible within the book of Isaiah. The passage itself is short, and over the centuries, scholars, translators, and readers have debated exactly how the word should be understood. That uncertainty may sound frustrating, but for Lilith, uncertainty almost seems woven into the story itself. Different translations approached the passage differently. Some interpreted the term as a creature associated with desolate places. Others translated it in ways connected with night beings or wilderness imagery. Still others avoided using Lilith as a proper name altogether. Ancient languages can be difficult companions. Words shift meaning over centuries. Cultural assumptions change. Context disappears. A single term can gather entirely different interpretations depending on who is reading it and when they are reading it. And perhaps nowhere is that more apparent than here. Imagine an old manuscript resting beneath lamplight. A scholar sits quietly beside it centuries ago, reading words already ancient in their own time. Even then, people were looking backward. Even then, people were interpreting older stories. Even then, people were wondering. Because stories rarely remain frozen. They move through generations much the way rivers move through landscapes, carrying pieces from one place into another. And as stories travel, they change. The Lilith who begins appearing in later traditions slowly starts becoming more recognizable than the distant figures we encountered earlier. Shapes begin forming around her identity. Characteristics begin gathering around her name. Not all at once. Slowly, very slowly. Some traditions increasingly connected Lilith with wilderness and lonely places. Deserts appear again. Isolation appears again. Night remains close beside her story. Ancient landscapes often carried symbolic meaning beyond geography itself. Wilderness represented distance from ordinary life. Desert spaces felt remote and uncertain. Places beyond familiar settlements became natural homes for mystery. And mystery followed Lilith wherever she traveled. What makes her especially fascinating is that even at this stage, she does not behave like many mythological figures. Heroes usually arrive with introductions. Kings receive lineages. Gods announce themselves with dramatic stories and grand entrances. Lilith appears differently. She slips into the edges. She arrives through fragments. She gathers meaning gradually. Perhaps this explains part of her lasting power, because mystery can be strangely magnetic. Human beings often become fascinated by incomplete stories. We are naturally drawn toward unanswered questions. An unfinished sentence can remain in memory. A locked door invites curiosity. A figure standing partly hidden often becomes more compelling than one fully explained. Lilith exists in that space, not fully visible, not entirely hidden, somewhere in between. As Jewish folklore continued evolving across centuries, stories surrounding Lilith expanded and transformed. Traditions accumulated details. Interpretations deepened. Storytellers added ideas and images that earlier generations may never have imagined. This happened often in the ancient world. Stories traveled alongside people. Communities migrated. Cultures met. Beliefs overlapped. And stories absorbed pieces along the way. One generation inherited old traditions and quietly reshaped them. The next generation inherited those changes and reshaped them again. Little by little, century after century. And as Lilith moved through those centuries, something remarkable began happening. She slowly transformed from a shadowy figure into a character people wanted to understand. Not simply fear, understand. Questions followed her. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why did her name continue appearing? Why did people keep telling stories about her? And perhaps most interesting of all, why does she feel strangely different from so many other figures found in old traditions? Because even before later stories fully emerge, Lilith already carries a quality that feels difficult to define. She does not sit comfortably inside simple categories. She is not entirely monster, not entirely spirit, not entirely symbol. Something more complicated seems to be taking shape. And perhaps complexity itself helps explain why some myths survive. Simple stories sometimes fade. Straightforward explanations sometimes disappear. But figures who resist easy understanding often remain with us. People return to them. People reinterpret them. People see different meanings waiting there. Across history, stories often survive not because they remain unchanged, but because they remain adaptable. Like mirrors, different generations look into them and discover different reflections. And Lilith may be one of mythology's most remarkable examples of that process. Because while we have begun hearing her name more clearly now, we still stand only near the beginning of the journey. The story many people know best, the story that transformed Lilith into one of mythology's most discussed and debated figures, still waits ahead. A garden waits ahead. Ancient paths wait ahead. And somewhere beyond them, another story approaches, one that would reshape Lilith more dramatically than perhaps any story before it. Because soon, storytellers would imagine something unforgettable. Not Lilith as a distant spirit, not Lilith as a shadow moving beyond settlements, but Lilith standing at the very beginning of humanity itself. And with that story, the mystery surrounding her would grow deeper than ever before. The garden was still new then. Morning light moved softly across rivers and trees, while gentle winds carried the scent of growing things through open fields. Water flowed quietly over smooth stones. Animals wandered through tall grasses, and the world itself seemed untouched, as though creation had only recently awakened. Everything felt young, and everything felt still. Paths had not yet been worn into the earth, and each day must have carried the strange feeling of beginnings. The world was quiet enough that even small sounds might have felt important. And according to one later tradition, Adam was not alone in the Garden of Eden. Long before many people imagined Eve entering the story, some storytellers described another figure standing beside him at the beginning. Her name was Lilith, and in this version of the tale, she stood beneath the same skies, beside the same rivers, at the dawn of the world itself. Imagine her there for a moment. Two figures stand beneath broad skies while distant trees sway gently in the wind. Around them, rivers move quietly through the landscape, and everything feels peaceful in the way only stories about beginnings often do. According to later traditions, Adam and Lilith shared the same origin. Both had been formed from the same earth, and both emerged from the same beginning. In many retellings, this detail becomes important because from the very start it shaped how Lilith understood herself and her place in the world around her. At first, perhaps nothing felt unusual. Days passed quietly beneath warm skies, while mornings gave way to evenings, and evenings returned once more to morning. Rivers continued flowing, trees continued swaying, and life in the garden followed its calm and gentle rhythm. Stories often change quietly at first, not through battles or storms, but through conversations and questions. Imagine two figures walking beneath trees while soft winds move overhead and distant birds cross the sky. Perhaps pauses appear between words. Perhaps small disagreements begin emerging, the sort that seem unimportant at first. Small questions sometimes become larger ones. According to later versions of the story, tension slowly began growing between Adam and Lilith. Different retellings describe the disagreement differently, but many versions circle around similar ideas involving place, authority, and equality. Because according to this tradition, Lilith believed something simple and important. If both had been formed from the same earth and shared the same beginning, then why should one stand above the other? The question itself feels quiet, yet questions sometimes carry enormous weight. Perhaps the question lingered. Perhaps it returned again and again during long walks beneath trees and beside rivers. Some questions do that. They remain in the background and slowly gather meaning over time, appearing and reappearing long after conversations seem finished. Days continued passing. The garden itself still looked unchanged. Rivers flowed where they always had, and sunlight continued filtering through leaves overhead. Yet beneath that peaceful surface, something had begun shifting. Not loudly and not all at once. Like distant thunder beyond a horizon still hidden from sight, tension had begun gathering quietly. The world remained beautiful, yet the calmness no longer felt entirely the same. Eventually, according to this version of the story, Lilith refused to accept a place she believed stood beneath Adam. The moment arrives without dramatic music or signs in the heavens. No mountains tremble, no skies darken overhead. Instead, something quieter happens. Lilith turns away from the garden. Imagine that moment carefully. Behind her stretch rivers and trees beneath broad skies, while paradise itself rests peacefully in the distance. Everything familiar remains there, and everything known waits behind her. Ahead lies uncertainty. Ahead lies distance and wilderness. Ahead lie places not yet seen and roads not yet traveled. The world beyond the garden remains vast and unknown, and still Lilith begins walking. Step by step, the garden slowly grows smaller behind her. Rivers disappear into distance, trees fade against the horizon, and familiar paths gradually vanish from view. Yet she continues walking, moving farther from certainty with every step. There is something strangely quiet about that image. Mythology often fills itself with impossible battles and dramatic moments where heroes raise swords and gods arrive in storms. Great kingdoms rise, prophecies unfold, and legends announce themselves loudly. But this story moves differently. Someone leaves, and someone keeps walking. One of mythology's most memorable moments arrives not through conquest or victory, but through departure. The quietness itself feels unusual, and perhaps that quietness explains why people continued returning to the story. Because over centuries, storytellers began looking back at this moment and imagining different meanings inside it. Some viewed Lilith's departure as defiance, while others treated it as a warning. Some saw rebellion, and others found sorrow or independence waiting there. Stories have a way of changing. As generations passed, new storytellers added details to what happened after Lilith left the garden. Some imagined heavenly messengers sent after her, while others expanded her journey into stranger landscapes beyond Eden itself. Like rivers slowly changing course, stories shifted as they traveled through time. The farther Lilith moved from the garden, the larger her mythology became. And perhaps that happens because people are naturally drawn toward unfinished stories. We wonder what happened after someone disappeared beyond the horizon, and we wonder what roads they followed once they vanished from sight. Questions linger, and mysteries linger too. Lilith leaves behind many of both, and perhaps she always has. Now the garden rests far behind us. Ahead, beneath moonlit skies and distant horizons, older shadows begin gathering. Because according to later traditions, Lilith's journey beyond Eden has only just begun. The garden rests far behind us now. Its rivers have disappeared into the distance, and its trees have faded into memory. The paths of Eden no longer stretch beneath open skies, and whatever peaceful stillness once surrounded that place has grown faint with time. Ahead lies a different landscape. The world feels wider now and quieter too. Winds move across empty spaces. Moonlight settles over distant horizons. Somewhere beyond sight, water rises and falls against unseen shores. And according to later traditions, this is where Lilith travels after leaving the garden. Imagine her walking farther and farther from familiar places. The story does not describe crowds watching her leave. No gates close behind her. No voices call after her from distant hills. The departure feels strangely quiet, as though the world itself simply watches her disappear into widening landscapes. The farther she travels, the stranger the story becomes. Because in later traditions, Lilith's journey eventually leads toward a place associated with ancient waters and distant boundaries, the region of the Red Sea. Across folklore and later writings, this place becomes closely connected with her story, and perhaps that setting feels appropriate. Ancient seas often felt mysterious in ways difficult to imagine today. Maps remained incomplete. Horizons stretched endlessly into distance. Strange weather appeared without warning. Waters could seem calm one moment and dangerous the next. Remote places gathered stories. Lonely places gathered mysteries. Imagine standing along such a shoreline at night. Wind moves across dark water while moonlight stretches in silver ribbons across the surface. Waves rise and fall softly against stone, and beyond the horizon there is only darkness. Some places feel different after sunset. Some places seem to belong to stories. And perhaps storytellers long ago imagined Lilith arriving somewhere very much like this, a place far from gardens and certainty, a place where old boundaries no longer mattered. Because once Lilith leaves Eden, she does not simply disappear. Stories follow her. As generations passed, later traditions began adding new details to her journey. In some versions of the story, heavenly messengers are sent to find her. 3 angels are given a task: They are to search distant places and persuade Lilith to return. Imagine the journey. 3 figures moving through ancient landscapes beneath broad skies. Days pass beneath sunlight and wind. Nights arrive beneath stars. Deserts stretch toward distant horizons where heat rises from stone and sand. The journey itself feels almost dreamlike, because myths often pause in curious places. They linger on roads. They linger on thresholds. They linger in spaces between departure and arrival. Eventually, the messengers find her, at least according to many later traditions. Perhaps she stands beside distant waters. Perhaps she watches waves moving against the shore. Perhaps winds move softly through the night as the messengers approach. And perhaps they ask her to return. The garden waits behind her. The beginning waits behind her. The familiar world waits behind her. But once again, the story turns in a direction that feels unexpectedly quiet. Lilith refuses. Not with thunder, not with anger, not with battle. She simply refuses. And this moment feels important because mythology often reveals character through repetition. Earlier, we watched Lilith leave the garden itself. Now we find her choosing distance again. She chooses her own path. Again, the story turns toward separation. Again, she continues walking away from certainty. And perhaps that repeated choice explains part of why later generations became fascinated by her story. Mythological figures often follow expected paths. Heroes answer quests. Kings pursue power. Legends frequently move toward familiar destinations. Lilith moves differently. She leaves. She departs. She refuses to return. And as stories continue traveling across generations, her image began changing once more. The farther we move from the garden, the more layers gather around her story. People began imagining new details. Old fears attached themselves to older traditions. Communities added beliefs that reflected their own worries and uncertainties. Stories do this constantly. Stories absorb the people telling them. Now imagine an evening many centuries ago. A family gathers inside a quiet home while wind moves softly outside. Oil lamps cast warm light against stone walls, and shadows stretch into corners of the room. A parent checks on a sleeping child. Perhaps they pause. Perhaps they look toward the doorway. Ancient people lived beside uncertainties that could feel frightening and difficult to explain. Illness could arrive suddenly. Strange events sometimes seemed to happen without warning. Sleep itself carried mysteries. And where mysteries grow, stories often follow. Over time, traditions surrounding Lilith gradually became connected with fears involving nighttime dangers and unseen forces. Across some folklore, she became associated with stories families told to explain anxieties that felt difficult to understand. Not because people enjoyed fear, because people search for meaning. Humans have always done this. When uncertainty enters life, people often create rituals and symbols that offer comfort. Across many cultures and many centuries, protective traditions emerged around homes and families. Small objects carried significance. Words mattered. Symbols mattered. A charm placed carefully above a doorway could feel important. A protective object near a sleeping place could provide reassurance. Ancient people, much like people today, search for ways to feel safer inside uncertain worlds. And eventually, in some traditions, even the names of the angels sent after Lilith became part of those protective customs. Their names appeared on amulets and inscriptions meant to guard homes and children. Stories had become rituals. Rituals had become daily life. And somewhere inside all of this, Lilith herself continued changing. The woman who once stood inside a garden now felt much farther away. With every new telling, she gathered more mystery, more symbolism, more questions. And perhaps that is the strangest part of all. The farther Lilith moves from the beginning of her story, the less clearly we seem to see her. Details grow larger, yet certainty grows smaller. The figure at the center of the tale becomes harder to define. Like someone disappearing slowly into moonlight, like a traveler moving farther along an unseen road. And as our journey continues, new storytellers still wait ahead. Medieval scholars and mystics will soon encounter Lilith and add still more layers to her legend. Because the story is still changing, and the shadows surrounding Lilith have only begun growing deeper. The world had changed again by now. The roads beyond Eden had stretched farther than anyone could have imagined, and centuries had passed like wind across distant deserts. Kingdoms rose and disappeared. Languages shifted. New generations inherited old stories, and each generation carried those stories into different places. By now, Lilith had become a traveler. Not the kind who walked roads beneath sunlight, but the kind who traveled through whispers and stories. She moved from voice to voice and from one century into another. Every time someone repeated her story, something changed. A detail shifted, a mystery deepened, a shadow grew slightly larger. Imagine arriving in a medieval town after sunset. Stone streets make travel between buildings a little less sturdy, while lanterns glow softly beside narrow doorways. Somewhere nearby, a fire burns inside a home while rain taps gently against rooftops. Night feels larger here. There are no streetlights stretching toward distant corners. Darkness gathers in alleyways and between buildings. Breezes move through empty streets and carry sounds that seem farther away than they truly are. A creaking door, footsteps, distant voices. Small sounds become important at night. Now imagine stepping inside one of the homes. A family gathers close to the warmth of a fire while shadows move softly against the walls. Outside, evening continues deepening. A child asks a question. Perhaps it is the sort of question children have asked for thousands of years. What moves outside at night? The room grows quieter, and someone begins telling a story. Not a story of kings or heroes, not a story of battles, something older, something stranger. The storyteller leans closer to the fire and says that some figures prefer darkness. Some wander far from villages and roads. Some move where winds travel and where moonlight reaches empty places. And perhaps among them walks Lilith. In some medieval traditions, stories describe Lilith as a mysterious being associated with the night. By now she had traveled far from the garden and far from the woman who simply walked away from Eden. Stories had continued gathering around her for centuries, and stories rarely remain unchanged. Now imagine another evening in another town many years later. Once again, people gather beneath candlelight while darkness waits outside narrow windows. But this storyteller remembers the tale differently, because this version begins not with wilderness. It begins with dreams. Imagine someone sleeping peacefully while rain falls softly outside. Hours pass quietly. Then suddenly they awaken. Perhaps they cannot explain why. Perhaps a strange dream lingers. Perhaps there is only a feeling, a strange heaviness, a sense that something felt unusual in the night. Experiences like this have always unsettled people. Long before sleep science and modern explanations existed, dreams and nighttime experiences felt deeply mysterious. People entered strange worlds while sleeping and returned carrying emotions that sometimes stayed long after morning arrived. And where mystery grows, stories often follow. Some traditions connected Lilith with strange experiences surrounding sleep and nighttime fears. For people living centuries ago, stories sometimes offered explanations for experiences that felt difficult to understand. Not because people enjoyed frightening stories, because people search for answers. Now imagine another storyteller in another place. This one speaks more softly. Candlelight flickers nearby while listeners lean forward. In this version, Lilith is no longer only connected with darkness or dreams. Now she has become part of warnings, part of protection, part of everyday life. Imagine a parent standing beside a child's bed late at night. Breezes move gently outside while shadows stretch along nearby walls. Before leaving the room, the parent pauses and places something beside the doorway. A small charm, a symbol, words carefully written. Not because of certainty, because of hope. Throughout history, people across many cultures carried protective objects. Tiny rituals offered comfort during uncertain moments. People hung symbols above doors and placed objects near sleeping places. And over time, some traditions connected these protective customs with Lilith stories. Now imagine yet another storyteller many years later. This storyteller begins differently, not with gardens, not with dreams, not with warnings. Instead, the storyteller says something curious. Perhaps no one truly knows who Lilith is. The room grows quieter, because by now her story has become enormous. Centuries of retellings have gathered around her. One listener imagines a wandering spirit. Another remembers the woman who left Eden. Someone else thinks of moonlit roads and strange dreams. Everyone pictures something different. And perhaps that is the strangest story of all. Because somewhere along the journey, Lilith became larger than a single tale. She became many stories living together at once. She became questions without complete answers. Imagine shelves inside an old library. Hundreds of books rest in candlelit rooms while dust settles softly across forgotten pages. Somewhere inside those shelves are stories about Lilith. One version says one thing, another says something different, another changes the story entirely. And somewhere between all of them, hidden beneath centuries of retelling, the original shape becomes difficult to see. Like footprints disappearing beneath drifting sand, like distant lights fading into fog, like a traveler moving farther down a road at night. And perhaps that is why Lilith continued surviving while so many other figures slowly faded away. Clear answers sometimes disappear quickly. Complete stories often reach endings. Mysteries linger. Questions linger too. As our journey continues, we leave behind these medieval firesides and candlelit rooms. Ahead, scholars and mystics wait beneath different skies, and they too will inherit Lilith's story. But they will not leave it unchanged. Because once again the shadows are preparing to shift, and once again Lilith is about to become something entirely new. The roads grow quieter now. The medieval towns and warm firelit rooms slowly disappear behind us, their narrow streets fading into memory, while our journey continues into stranger landscapes. The stories surrounding Lilith have traveled across centuries by this point, gathering new shapes and new mysteries with every generation that carried them forward. And somewhere ahead, the world becomes more mysterious again. Imagine climbing a narrow stone staircase late at night. Candlelight flickers softly along ancient walls while shadows stretch across worn stone steps. Higher and higher the staircase rises, leading toward a small room hidden above the sleeping streets below. Inside sits a scholar, or perhaps a mystic, or perhaps simply someone searching for answers beneath the quiet company of stars. Scrolls rest open across a table while strange symbols cover nearby pages, and beyond a narrow window night stretches endlessly toward the horizon. Because by now many people believe the world contained layers hidden beneath ordinary sight, not simply roads and rivers or cities and mountains. Something larger waited beyond visible things, something woven quietly beneath reality itself. In many mystical traditions, the universe felt alive with hidden patterns waiting to be discovered. Every star carried meaning. Every dream might carry a message. Every strange coincidence could feel like part of a larger design. And somewhere within these hidden landscapes, Lilith appeared once more. Imagine an old storyteller seated beside candlelight. The room has grown quiet now, and listeners lean slightly closer while shadows move gently along nearby walls. Outside, night breezes drift through narrow streets while stars continue their slow journey overhead. The storyteller lowers their voice, because this story begins not upon earth, but above it. Far above sleeping villages and moonlit roads, ancient traditions imagine unseen realms stretching into endless darkness. Great mysteries moved there beyond ordinary sight, and hidden forces traveled silently through places untouched by daylight. And among those mysteries moved Lilith. In some later traditions, stories surrounding Lilith grew larger and stranger than before. She no longer belonged only to gardens or distant shorelines. Now storytellers imagine her moving through hidden realms and cosmic places resting beyond ordinary human experience. Imagine her standing beneath skies filled with stars. Not stars scattered across familiar fields or villages below. Endless stars stretch in every direction, ancient lights drifting across distances so vast they seem impossible to imagine. The heavens themselves feel alive. Now imagine another story. A traveler walks alone beneath moonlight while distant hills rise darkly against the horizon. Night winds move softly through trees while stars shimmer overhead, and somewhere far away a small light flickers briefly before disappearing. The traveler has heard warnings before. Avoid lonely roads after dark. Avoid forgotten places where few people travel, and avoid crossroads where strange things sometimes happen. Ancient stories love crossroads because crossroads represented uncertainty, and uncertainty has always gathered mystery around itself. Roads meeting beneath open skies felt important. At such places, a traveler stood between possibilities. One path led one direction, another path led somewhere entirely different, and sometimes old stories suggested that unusual things waited in spaces between choices. Imagine the traveler pausing. The breeze moves softly through darkness while distant branches sway overhead. Nothing seems unusual at first, yet perhaps something feels different. Perhaps there is only a strange sensation, the feeling that someone else stands nearby beyond the reach of moonlight. Many old traditions surrounding Lilith gathered around places like these. Thresholds mattered, crossroads mattered, doorways mattered too, because stories have always loved places between places. Human beings seem naturally drawn toward boundaries where certainty begins giving way to mystery. Now imagine another storyteller many years later. This storyteller begins not with roads or stars, but with hidden names and quiet rituals. Across many ancient traditions, names carried extraordinary power. Knowing a true name sometimes meant understanding something deeper, and certain words were believed to provide protection against mysteries moving through unseen worlds. Imagine a small room late at night. A lamp burns softly beside a table while someone writes carefully upon parchment. Outside, stars move silently overhead while breezes drift through darkness. The room remains quiet except for the faint scratching sound of ink moving slowly across paper. Tiny acts sometimes carried enormous meaning. A carefully written symbol, a small charm near a doorway, words spoken softly before sleep. Human beings have always searched for ways to stand beside mystery without feeling entirely overwhelmed by it. Rituals offered comfort not because they erased uncertainty, but because uncertainty itself often felt enormous. Now imagine one final story. A person sits awake beside a window overlooking distant hills beneath moonlight. Hours pass quietly while the world around them sleeps. Winds move through darkness while stars continue their slow movement overhead. Eventually, thoughts begin wandering. Human beings have always stared upward and wondered if unseen worlds waited beyond sight. Ancient people looked into enormous night skies and imagined mysteries unfolding far above them. They saw movement and meaning where modern people might see astronomy alone. And perhaps that longing itself matters, because stories surrounding figures like Lilith often gather around larger questions. What waits beyond ordinary sight? What moves quietly through hidden places? What mysteries exist beyond the edges of certainty? Questions like these followed humanity for thousands of years. Perhaps they always will, because the farther Lilith travels through history, the larger the landscapes around her become. She no longer belongs only to gardens, dreams, distant roads, or moonlit shorelines. Now she moves through stars and hidden spaces, through whispers and strange stories told beneath candlelight. And perhaps this is where Lilith becomes most mysterious of all. Not because we finally see her clearly, but because we do not. Imagine standing beneath a sky untouched by city lights while stars stretch endlessly overhead. Somewhere above, ancient people once imagined unseen mysteries drifting silently through darkness. And perhaps among those mysteries walked Lilith herself. Not fully visible, never entirely understood, always waiting somewhere just beyond certainty. By now, the roads behind us have become difficult to see. The gardens, deserts, distant shorelines, and candlelit rooms have faded into memory, while our journey continues through stranger places. Lilith has traveled far across centuries, and with every new storyteller who carried her name forward, something about her continued changing. Not her mystery itself, but the world surrounding her. Stories do curious things over time. They gather details the way travelers gather keepsakes from distant places. A small image appears in one tale and follows the story into another. A symbol attached in one century quietly survives into the next. Eventually, people forget where the details first began and remember only that somehow they belong together. And over time, strange companions began gathering around Lilith. Imagine another evening long ago. A traveler walks beneath a moonlit sky while distant hills rise softly against the horizon. The wind moves through dry grass beside the road, and the path ahead feels quieter than expected. Stars stretch overhead while darkness settles gently across the landscape. The traveler continues walking beneath the moon. Then somewhere nearby comes a sound, not loud enough to frighten anyone and not strange enough to stop someone in their tracks, just unexpected enough to be noticed. A call echoes from somewhere beyond the road. Ancient people knew such moments well. Before electric lights softened darkness and before modern cities pushed back the night, evenings felt larger somehow. The world after sunset belonged to different sounds and different creatures. Wings crossed unseen skies while animals moved through forests and fields hidden beyond sight. Night belonged to different things. Among the creatures most often wrapped in mystery were owls. Imagine seeing one perch silently upon the branch of an old tree while moonlight settles softly across pale feathers. Large eyes stare outward into darkness while everything around it remains perfectly still. For a long moment, nothing happens. Then suddenly the owl moves. Ancient people often viewed owls with fascination because owls seemed to belong to a world humans barely understood. They traveled through darkness effortlessly while people struggled to see beyond shadows. They appeared silently and vanished just as quickly. And over time, stories sometimes placed owls near Lilith. Not every story did this, and not every tradition imagined her the same way. But the image appeared often enough that eventually it stayed. Centuries passed, and for many storytellers, Lilith and the owls seemed naturally connected. Imagine now a storyteller sitting beside a fire many generations ago. Outside, night deepens beyond the doorway, while listeners gather closer to warmth and light. Warm breezes waft softly beyond the walls, and eventually someone asks a simple question. What did Lilith look like? The storyteller pauses, because by now no one seems entirely certain. Some imagine her standing beneath moonlight with dark hair moving softly in the wind. Others picture wings unfolding against the night sky. Some imagine a traveler moving silently through distant places, while others see only a shadow passing briefly through darkness. And some picture owls. Stories rarely explain why these images gather together. They simply do. Over time, Lilith became surrounded by things already carrying mystery of their own. Moonlight followed her. Wilderness followed her. Night birds, distant places, crossroads, and stars slowly gathered around her story. It was almost as though storytellers continued giving her companions from the world of shadows. Now imagine another story. A village rests quietly beneath moonlight while distant hills rise beyond sleeping homes. Windows darken one by one while evening settles gently over rooftops and narrow roads. Somewhere nearby, a dog lifts its head, then another. Nothing dramatic happens. No figure appears at the edge of the village, and no strange light emerges from the hills. Yet something feels different somehow, and perhaps someone standing outside pauses for a moment and glances toward the horizon. Ancient stories loved moments like these, not moments filled with action or spectacle, but moments built from uncertainty. A pause in the ordinary rhythm of the world, a feeling that something had shifted, even if no one could explain exactly what. And perhaps someone standing there eventually looks upward. Far overhead, the moon hangs quietly above distant hills. The moon followed Lilith too. Stories did not always say this directly, yet moonlight and Lilith often seemed to belong together naturally. Both carried uncertainty. Both appeared and disappeared. Both changed while somehow remaining familiar. The moon itself transforms constantly. Sometimes it appears full and bright above the world below. Sometimes only part of it remains visible. Sometimes it disappears almost entirely before returning once more. Perhaps storytellers noticed that, because Lilith changes too. She appears one way in one story and differently in another. Sometimes she feels like a figure walking through wilderness. Sometimes she feels connected to dreams. Sometimes she stands beside distant waters while stars move overhead. She never remains entirely still. Now imagine another storyteller many years later. This one sits beneath stars rather than rooftops while a small fire burns nearby. Listeners gather around while darkness stretches far beyond the circle of light. Eventually, someone asks another question. Where does Lilith live now? The storyteller smiles because by now that question has become difficult to answer. Does she live beside distant seas? Does she travel roads beneath moonlight? Does she move through dreams and hidden places? Or perhaps she belongs everywhere. Perhaps figures like Lilith stop belonging to one place after enough stories gather around them. The farther we travel through her story, the more she seems to become part of the landscape itself. She becomes moonlight crossing distant hills. She becomes wings passing overhead. She becomes the sound of wind moving through lonely places at night. And perhaps this is where her mystery deepens once again. By now, Lilith no longer feels entirely like a person standing inside a story. Instead, she begins to feel like something waiting at the edges of stories themselves, something glimpsed only briefly before disappearing once more. Some mysteries survive because no one solves them completely. Some figures endure because no one ever sees them clearly enough to explain them. And Lilith seems to drift deeper into that world with every story that follows. Ahead, new storytellers still wait. Artists and poets stand somewhere beyond the horizon, preparing to imagine Lilith once more beneath entirely different skies. And once again, her story is about to change. By now we have traveled with Lilith through gardens, deserts, distant roads, hidden realms, and stories whispered beneath candlelight. We have followed her across centuries while generation after generation reshaped her journey. Yet even after all this distance, something curious remains. We still do not entirely know her. We know the places stories carried her. We know the fears and mysteries attached themselves to her name, and we know the road she walked through legend. But now our journey changes once again because somewhere ahead, artists and poets are waiting. And artists ask different questions. Imagine entering a long candlelit gallery late in the evening. Paintings rest quietly along stone walls while soft lamplight glows across polished floors. Footsteps echo gently through large rooms filled with portraits, landscapes, and dreamlike images gathered from distant places and different centuries. Somewhere among them hangs Lilith. And perhaps for the first time, we stop and truly look at her. Stories often keep Lilith hidden behind movement and mystery. She appears briefly beneath moonlight, disappears into shadows, and vanishes into distant landscapes before anyone sees her clearly. Artists bring her closer. They ask questions earlier storytellers sometimes left unanswered. What expression rests upon her face? How does she stand? Does she look toward the viewer directly, or toward something far away that no one else can see? Imagine a painter sitting quietly beside a canvas many years ago. Outside, rain taps softly against tall windows, while evening gathers over rooftops and narrow streets below. The painter pauses with a brush resting lightly in hand and stares at an empty canvas. How do you paint mystery? How do you paint someone no one entirely understands? By now, Lilith has become larger than a single story. Different generations remember different versions of her, and every storyteller seems to hand the painter a different face. Some remember the woman who walked away from Eden. Some remember a figure traveling lonely roads beneath moonlight. Others remember hidden worlds, strange dreams, and stories whispered beside flickering fires. Each version leaves behind a small piece, and now artists begin gathering all of them together. Over time, Lilith slowly changes again. Earlier stories often kept her distant, hidden among darkness and uncertainty, but artists and writers become fascinated by her in entirely different ways. They begin imagining not only mystery, but beauty. Not ordinary beauty, strange beauty. The sort of beauty that feels difficult to explain and difficult to forget. Imagine standing before a portrait where Lilith sits beneath soft light while dark hair falls loosely across her shoulders. Her expression remains calm, almost thoughtful, and there is no obvious anger or sadness there. Instead, something feels hidden. The feeling that she knows something she never intends to explain. The feeling that if she spoke, she might answer questions no one has even thought to ask. She seems quiet, yet not distant, present, yet somehow unreachable. And perhaps that detail matters. Human beings have always been drawn toward unanswered questions. A half-open door invites curiosity. A story ending without explanation lingers in memory. Mystery becomes stronger when part of it remains hidden. And Lilith often feels like a story still being finished. Imagine now another artist many years later. This one paints differently. Sunlight fades beyond tall windows while oils and pigments cover nearby tables. The artist studies a blank canvas for a long while before beginning. Perhaps this Lilith stands beneath moonlight. Perhaps wings appear behind her while distant stars spread across the sky. Owls rest in dark branches nearby while soft winds move through trees. The details shift and the image changes, yet something always remains familiar. Because no matter how artists imagined her, Lilith rarely appeared ordinary. Even standing still, she often seems to carry movement with her somehow, as though part of her still belongs to distant roads and unfamiliar places. As though part of her remains unfinished and always searching for somewhere just beyond the horizon. Writers notice this too. Poets especially seem drawn toward figures like Lilith, because poets often love mystery more than explanation. Heroes can become predictable. Kings can feel too familiar. But figures surrounded by uncertainty leave room for imagination to wander. And imagination wandered often. Imagine a writer seated beside a narrow window late at night. Candlelight flickers softly nearby while wind moves beyond the glass. Papers rest scattered across a table while stars shine overhead. The writer pauses for a long moment. Because how do you describe Lilith? Does she enter a room quietly while people gradually notice her presence? Does moonlight seem to follow her somehow? Does she speak softly, or does she say very little at all? Perhaps it is simpler than that. Perhaps she simply feels different. Some later writers imagine Lilith almost like a dream remembered imperfectly after waking. Not frightening exactly and not comforting either. Just difficult to forget, like a melody heard long ago or a face remembered without knowing where it was first seen. Like footsteps fading behind you at night. Like someone standing at the edge of memory. And perhaps this is where we finally begin feeling closer to her. After centuries of stories and shifting legends, Lilith slowly becomes less like a distant figure hidden within mythology and more like someone standing just beyond full understanding. Not entirely stranger, not entirely familiar, something in between. Perhaps she watches more than she speaks. Perhaps she notices things others overlook. Stories never seem entirely certain, and maybe certainty was never really the point. Imagine sitting beside a fire while someone begins describing a traveler they once met long ago. At first, the details seem ordinary enough, yet with every sentence, curiosity grows stronger. You want to know more. Where did she come from? Where was she going? Why does everyone remember her after she disappears down the road? And perhaps that is exactly how Lilith survives. Not because stories explain her completely, but because they do not. They offer glimpses instead. A face in moonlight, dark hair moving softly in distant wind, and eyes carrying thoughts never spoken aloud. A traveler standing at the edge of a road, and perhaps somewhere during our journey, after following her through gardens and stars and endless stories, we realize something strange. We are still meeting her even now because every storyteller, painter, and poet discovers a different Lilith waiting inside the mystery. One sees sorrow, another sees strength. One sees loneliness while another sees danger. Each believes they understand her, and none entirely do. Perhaps that uncertainty remains the closest thing to an answer we will ever receive. Now the roads ahead begin changing once more. The worlds of paintings and poetry slowly fade behind us while another age approaches in the distance, because soon Lilith will step into modern stories. And once again, she is about to become someone new. Now the world changes once again. The candlelit galleries and quiet rooms of poets slowly fade behind us while new lights begin appearing in the distance. The roads ahead no longer pass through forgotten villages, or moonlit deserts. Instead, they lead toward movie screens, novels, television stories, and worlds built from imagination. And somehow, Lilith has arrived there too. After traveling through thousands of years of mythology, she steps into modern stories, carrying all the mystery gathered across earlier centuries. Yet something curious happens whenever modern storytellers meet Lilith. They rarely leave her unchanged. Imagine entering a dark theater just before a film begins. The room grows quiet while soft light flickers across the screen and people settle into seats around you. Somewhere overhead, music begins drifting through the darkness. Then the story opens. Ancient ruins stand beneath storm clouds, while strange symbols cover forgotten walls. Winds move across distant landscapes, and old prophecies whisper about something waiting beyond sight. Somewhere inside the story stands Lilith, not hidden anymore, not standing quietly at the edge of someone else's tale. Now she walks directly into the center. Modern storytellers often place Lilith in roles far larger than the mysterious wanderer we traveled beside earlier. Here she becomes a force moving events forward. Entire worlds shift because of her choices, and characters search for her, fear her, follow her, or desperately try to stop her. The story no longer happens around Lilith. Now the story happens because of her. Imagine another scene unfolding beneath torchlight. A traveler enters an ancient temple hidden deep beneath mountains, while dust hangs silently in the air. Symbols stretch across stone pillars while footsteps echo softly through darkness. At the center of the chamber rests a figure carved from stone. Someone whispers a name: Lilith. Modern stories seem to love moments like these because Lilith arrives carrying mystery before she ever speaks. Audiences already understand that something important waits nearby. Something ancient waits there, something powerful, and something impossible to predict. And perhaps no modern stories reveal this transformation more clearly than fantasy worlds and games. Imagine a world standing at the edge of collapse. Kingdoms tremble beneath dark skies, while ancient powers awaken beneath forgotten ruins. Heroes race against time, searching for answers, while old warnings begin returning from the past. Then Lilith enters the story, not quietly and not briefly. She arrives carrying power large enough to reshape entire worlds. In many modern portrayals, Lilith becomes a figure capable of changing reality itself. Sometimes she leads armies across broken landscapes. Sometimes she opens forbidden doors no one else dares approach. Sometimes she awakens powers sleeping beneath the world for centuries. And audiences continue following her, because even now she still carries the mystery gathered across thousands of years. Modern storytellers may give her different worlds and different appearances, yet traces of the older Lilith always remain somewhere beneath the surface. Imagine another version. This one begins not with ancient ruins or fantasy kingdoms, but with an ordinary city at night. Rain falls softly against windows while traffic moves below. Neon signs glow across wet streets while people disappear into crowds beneath umbrellas. Somewhere in the city, someone notices a stranger. At first, nothing feels unusual. Then slowly small details emerge. The stranger always seems calm while crowds move around her. Noise and movement surround her completely, yet she remains strangely untouched by all of it. People glance toward her and then look away again, uncertain why they noticed her in the first place. Perhaps she smiles. Perhaps not. Modern stories imagine Lilith this way too. Not as a distant figure hidden inside mythology, but as someone standing quietly among ordinary people. Almost ordinary, almost familiar, and yet somehow still carrying a feeling difficult to explain. Because something always feels different. And perhaps that feeling matters because even after entering modern worlds, that Lilith still belongs partly to mystery. She still feels like someone standing between places, someone existing between certainty and uncertainty. Not entirely here, not entirely elsewhere. Imagine now another story. A traveler searches across distant landscapes beneath dark skies while forgotten books and strange symbols hint at mysteries waiting just ahead. Eventually, the journey leads towards someone waiting quietly at the end of the road. Not a monster waiting in darkness. Not a queen seated upon a throne. Lilith waits there instead. And when the traveler finally meets her, something unexpected happens. She speaks calmly. There is no dramatic entrance and no thunder shaking distant mountains. Others panic around her. Others argue loudly, and others rush toward action. Lilith simply watches. Modern writers often imagine her this way. Perhaps this version already knows how the story ends. Perhaps she understands things no one else sees clearly. Or perhaps she remains mysterious simply because mystery has followed her for too long to disappear. Stories continue changing her. Movies change her and books change her. Games reshape her as well. Yet beneath every modern version, something ancient still survives. The woman who once walked away from Eden remains there somewhere, hidden beneath layers of newer stories. Even now, she lingers in the background. Modern storytellers give her new worlds and new clothing. They place her inside cities, fantasy kingdoms, and futures no ancient storyteller could have imagined. Yet somehow Lilith always remains recognizable. Not because of where she appears, not because of what she wears, because of what she does. She questions boundaries and changes stories around her. She walks through doors others avoid and chooses roads leading toward uncertainty. And perhaps that feels familiar by now because from the very beginning we watched Lilith leave a garden and walk toward the unknown. Thousands of years later, modern stories still imagine her moving in the same direction, always leaving certainty behind, always crossing boundaries, always walking farther into mystery. And perhaps that explains why she survives while so many mythological figures remain trapped inside the worlds that created them. Heroes often belong to one age and kings belong to one kingdom, but Lilith keeps moving. She slips into new stories while carrying old mysteries beside her. Every generation meets her differently, and every storyteller discovers something new waiting there. Yet perhaps the strangest thing is this. After all these centuries, after all these stories and endless transformations, Lilith still feels unfinished. She still feels like someone walking toward a distant horizon beneath moonlight, disappearing just far enough into the darkness that we cannot help wanting to follow. Now the roads begin growing quieter once more. The cities and stories of the modern world slowly fade behind us while our long journey with Lilith approaches its final stretch. We have followed her through gardens and deserts, through moonlit roads and hidden worlds, through paintings, dreams, and stories told beside candlelight. And after all of this distance, perhaps a curious question begins to appear. who is Lilith really? Not who storytellers claimed she was, not who painters imagined she looked like, and not who modern films or novels transformed her into. After thousands of years and countless retellings, perhaps another question waits beneath all the others. Why do people keep returning to her? Imagine for a moment an old philosopher walking beside you beneath a night sky. No city surrounds you now. No villages wait nearby. Only stars stretch overhead while a soft wind moves through distant grass. The road beneath your feet continues forward into darkness while moonlight settles across the landscape. For a while, the philosopher says nothing. Then eventually comes a question. Not an answer, only a question. What kind of stories survive the longest? The question lingers for a while because it is not as simple as it first appears. Thousands of stories once existed in the ancient world. Countless names filled old books and forgotten traditions. Many have vanished completely, and yet Lilith remains. Some stories disappear quietly into history. Others remain strangely alive, returning generation after generation. People continue telling them, reshaping them, and carrying them into new worlds. The philosopher continues walking. Perhaps the answer is not power. After all, mythology contains countless kings and warriors. Great heroes fought impossible battles while rulers built kingdoms stretching across distant lands. Powerful figures once filled stories, now almost entirely forgotten. But Lilith was never really a conqueror. She built no empire. She won no great battle, and still she remained. The philosopher glances toward the stars overhead. Perhaps stories survive not because they give answers, but because they continue asking questions. Human beings have always been drawn toward mysteries that remain unfinished. We remember the locked door more vividly than the open one. We think about the journey not taken and the road disappearing over distant hills. Uncertainty leaves room for imagination. And Lilith has always carried uncertainty beside her. Think about our journey together. We met Lilith first through fragments and whispers. We followed her through stories that changed depending upon who told them. Every century seemed to discover someone slightly different waiting beneath her name. One storyteller found danger, another found mystery, another found loneliness, and someone else found strength. The philosopher smiles slightly because perhaps this has happened before. Ancient people often looked into clouds and saw different shapes. One person saw mountains. Another saw ships crossing distant seas. Both looked at the same sky. Both saw something different. Perhaps stories work that way too. Perhaps figures like Lilith become mirrors. Not mirrors showing faces, but mirrors reflecting questions hidden quietly inside people themselves. Different generations carry different fears and different hopes. Different eras ask different questions. And so they discover different Liliths. Imagine now another question arriving. Why do mysterious figures often remain more fascinating than simple ones? The philosopher pauses beside a quiet hill while stars continue shining overhead. Somewhere far away, an owl calls softly through darkness while winds move gently across distant fields. Heroes often arrive with certainty. Villains arrive with certainty too. They tell us who they are immediately. They explain themselves clearly. Their stories move toward endings waiting from the very beginning. Lilith never really did that. She walked away from Eden and kept moving. She changed every time people believed they understood her. Just when one generation felt certain, another generation arrived and imagined someone entirely different. Perhaps that matters, because human beings change too. No person remains exactly the same throughout life. We leave places behind. We change our minds. We become people younger versions of ourselves could never have imagined. Perhaps stories that survive longest often resemble people themselves. Complicated, unfinished, always becoming something new. The philosopher sits beside a stone overlooking distant hills. Moonlight stretches softly across the landscape while stars continue their slow movement overhead. Then another question arrives. What if every generation creates the Lilith it needs? The idea feels strangely quiet. Ancient worlds feared unseen darkness and mysterious nights, so perhaps they imagined one version. Later generations wrestled with different questions and imagined another. Artists searched for beauty and mystery, while modern stories looked for power and independence. And perhaps all of them found something. Not because Lilith changed, because people changed. Perhaps every age carries certain questions quietly beneath the surface. Questions about freedom, questions about loneliness, questions about identity and belonging, questions about what happens when someone chooses an unfamiliar road. Lilith walked unfamiliar roads from the very beginning. Perhaps that journey still feels familiar. Imagine once more the figure we first followed long ago. A woman walks away from a garden beneath wide skies. Rivers disappear behind her while unknown landscapes wait ahead. She does not know where the road leads. Still she walks. Centuries pass. Stories gather around her. Mysteries gather too. And somehow she continues moving. Perhaps that image explains more than any answer ever could. Because after thousands of years, Lilith still feels like someone walking toward a distant horizon. We never quite catch up. We never quite understand her completely. And perhaps we are not supposed to. Some mysteries survive because no one solves them. Some figures remain alive because every generation discovers a different story waiting inside them. Lilith may be one of those figures. The philosopher rises slowly and looks once more toward the stars. Night stretches endlessly overhead while winds move quietly through darkness. Then comes one final thought. Perhaps the most enduring stories are not the stories that tell us exactly what to believe. Perhaps they are the stories that walk beside us quietly, asking questions and leaving space for us to answer them ourselves. And somewhere ahead, beyond moonlight and distant hills, Lilith continues walking still. Now our long journey is slowly reaching its end. The roads behind us stretch farther than they first appeared, traveling through ancient cities and moonlit deserts, through gardens and hidden places, through old manuscripts, paintings, and stories whispered softly across centuries. And somewhere along the way, Lilith remained just ahead of us. Not far ahead, just enough. Enough that we could continue following. Enough that mystery could remain mystery. We first met her as a distant possibility hidden inside fragments of the ancient world. We followed whispers carried from Mesopotamia and listened carefully beside old fires while storytellers spoke names drifting through darkness. We watched as she stepped quietly into gardens and then stepped quietly back out again. And perhaps that image stayed with us. Not battles, not victories, not kingdoms, simply someone walking toward the unknown. Along the way, we crossed moonlit roads and distant shores. We sat beside philosophers beneath stars and wandered through galleries where artists tried, capturing mystery with paint and canvas. We followed Lilith into modern stories where she continued changing, continued growing, and somehow continued remaining herself. Or perhaps remaining something even more curious, something unfinished. Because Lilith never seemed entirely interested in standing still. Every storyteller found something slightly different waiting beneath her name. Every century discovered new meanings while carrying older questions forward into new worlds. And perhaps that is why she endured. Some stories end neatly. Their roads arrive exactly where expected, and their mysteries eventually become answers. But other stories continue traveling long after the final page closes. Some stories keep walking. Lilith always felt like one of those stories. And perhaps tonight, after wandering together through centuries and starlit roads, we leave her where she seems most comfortable. Not seated upon a throne or standing at the center of a final scene, but somewhere farther ahead beneath distant skies. Still walking, still moving, still disappearing just slightly beyond certainty. Imagine one final glimpse before our journey ends. A distant road stretches beneath moonlight while stars fill the sky overhead. The breeze moves softly across open landscapes while the horizon fades into darkness. And somewhere far ahead, a figure continues walking. Not quickly, not slowly, simply onward. Perhaps she reaches a crossroads. Perhaps another story waits there. Perhaps another storyteller waits there too. And somewhere in another age, beside another fire, beneath another night sky, someone may speak her name once more and begin the journey all over again. Thank you for joining me tonight here on the Sleepy Legends channel. I am always grateful that you choose to spend these quiet journeys here, wandering through old myths and forgotten places together. There will always be more roads waiting ahead, more legends resting beneath distant stars, and more stories moving softly through history. Until our paths cross again, may your road be peaceful, may your evening be gentle, and may the ancient stories continue wandering quietly beside you. Good night, dear dreamers.